Recently, I posted a video, should you drive for Lyft and Uber in 2021? And in that video that I mentioned that I used to drive, but I don't drive anymore. And a lot of times when I tell people like, hey, I used to be an Uber driver and a Lyft driver, but then I stopped driving, a big question that I get is, all right, well, why did you stop driving? Like, was there any particular reason? Because obviously there's a lot of pros to driving for Lyft and driving for Uber, but a lot of cons as well. And being transparent on this video, the main reason why I stopped driving is the fact that my entrepreneurial pursuits, my electronic music and my YouTube videos and everything took off so I could actually completely live off those earnings. However, there are a lot of other reasons though, that the more I drove, the more I was like, you know what? I might consider quitting or consider pursuing something else because driving for Lyft and Uber, being honest, is just starting to get a little annoying. So in this video, in this super honest and transparent video, I'm gonna talk about the 7 reasons why I stopped being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver. Number 1, you get paid less. This is super annoying because I remember when I first started driving in Boston, there'd be times when it'd be like, say, a Boston winter, for example, and it'd be super snowy. I'd make sometimes close to like $60 an hour, which was amazing, which was awesome, right? And then the more I drove though, the more I noticed I was getting less and less per ride. I even remember, especially in the beginning, the Uber surges would be insane. Lyft was doing all these unique little like Lyft hourly guarantees where if you drove during a certain period of time and you had like a good acceptance rate and everything, you'd make, or they'd bump you up to minimum $40 an hour or $50 an hour. So I was getting so much money, and especially if you look at how many hours I was driving per week, I was getting really, really good income from the hours that I drove. Now, granted, I did drive only during the peak hours, so morning and evening commutes and Friday and Saturday nights, but when I drive into those hours, I was making so much money. But I definitely noticed the more that I drove, the less money I was making, and I noticed that Uber and Lyft would start changing their terms a lot more, where just as a driver, you're not making as much money as you were before. Number 2, there's no upwards mobility. What I mean is, if you start, like, say, at Target, for example, you start as a cashier, you can work right up. You get bonuses, you get raises every year from staying at Target. You can be promoted to a higher position, for example. And yes, while Lyft and Uber is an independent contractor job, I still did a lot of other independent contractor work. I would still get some upwards mobility, meaning that I'm now making more this year than I was the year before. I'm now getting more bonuses. I'm now getting more stuff because I've stayed with that company for longer. Not the case with Lyft and Uber. Now, I do know that Uber has rolled out some programs where, and this depends upon state to state and area to area, where if you drive more, you get, some extra cash, you get bonuses, in terms of how many rides you're doing, and there's all these different metrics and whatnot. And I do think that's good. However, to me though, it did stink that, like, say, if I started driving right now versus if I started driving 5 years ago, the bonus structures would be roughly about the same. And like I said, in almost any other job, even independent contractor work, you still get some type of raise or bonus or some type of incentive to stay with the company for longer. Number 3, car depreciation. Now, obviously, in order to drive for Lyft and Uber, you need a car. And basically, you could be in 2 different scenarios. One is you use your own car. So for me, I actually drove my Prius when I was driving for Lyft and Uber. Or 2, you rent a car from Lyft and Uber. Now, renting a car from them to drive is a whole other thing in itself. I actually know some people who actually have their own car, but still rented another car for Lyft and Uber because they didn't want to put all the miles and the depreciation on their car. There are some terms you have to figure out. That is a whole other topic for a whole other video because they can get super tricky in terms of all the fine print and the terms. But for me, I remember driving my car and being like, wow, I'm putting an insane amount of miles in terms of the depreciation on my car. Obviously, that means I'm gonna have to buy, tires sooner than later. I'm gonna have to do a lot more maintenance, so things like oil changes and other routine stuff on my car, things like gas, and you can write these off on your taxes in terms of itemized deductions, and that's super important to do as a Lyft and Uber driver, but it is just a lot more that goes into your car that most people really kind of forget about. And a lot of people don't know this too, that a lot of dealerships now, when you, like, say you go to sell your car, one of the questions they ask you is, has this car ever been used for a ride-sharing service such as Lyft and Uber? That is something that did not exist years ago, but now it's actually a thing. So that is something to keep in mind, that there's gonna be a lot of depreciation, wear and tear, and maintenance on your car, and essentially the value of your car is gonna go down. Number 4, you can't drive anytime. Now, I put an asterisk on that because obviously the best part about Lyft and Uber is it's instantaneously flexible. You turn on the app whenever you want. You turn it off whenever you want. And Lyft and Uber, I remember, especially back in the day, they don't do this anymore, understandably so. They used to be like, oh, minimum 15 an hour. You drive for us, you're gonna make 15 an hour on average. However, there's a massive asterisk on that yes, you can make a lot of good money driving Lyft and Uber. I did. But if you don't drive during the peak hours, you really don't make that much. And I know Uber and Lyft likes to say, oh, you can drive at any time, you can drive at any point in time. But the answer is not really. There were times in Boston where I would drive, let's say on 11 a.m. or noon on a random Tuesday, and I might make $3 an hour. Honestly, like I might get 1 or 2 rides, I might make $6 or $7, and then when you factor in depreciation, taxes, blah blah, it's really like $3 or $4. And it's like, well, I'd rather just maybe stay home and work on other things. So even though they do say that you can drive at any time, there is a massive asterisk on that. And that's something you realize once you start driving. However, especially now in 2021, and I mentioned this in that Should You Drive for Lyft and Uber in 2021 video, depending upon the state, this could vary. For example, Prop 22 just passed here in California. And what that means is as a driver, you now get a minimum hourly guarantee. So if let's say you do drive on a random Tuesday at noon, at least even if you only make $3 in fares, Uber and Lyft will actually bump you up to the minimum hourly guarantee. However, this is not true for every state, which is why I always suggest start driving for Lyft and Uber part-time, see how it works out, because I know some people who said, you know what, I'm just gonna go right into it, I'm gonna quit my job and go into it full-time. And at first glance, you might be like, wow, I make a lot of money driving part-time, driving during the peak hours. But then once you start driving full-time, you realize like, oh wow, I actually only really make good money during the peak hours, and the non-peak hours, I barely make anything. Number 5, health issues. Now for me, I'm huge into health and fitness, and it's probably no surprise to anybody, you've probably heard studies like this, sitting is one of the worst things for you. Now granted, I will say that obviously if you think about it, sitting like say at a desk or a cubicle in a 9-to-5 job versus sitting and driving, you're sitting in both scenarios, but at least to me, when I used to be an accountant, I could still get up and stretch and do stuff. When it comes to driving, I honestly felt like it took a huge toll on my health. Granted, yes, you can, like say pull over, and I did this, and like say get out of the car for a quick second, stretch, and kind of just stand up, but it's a lot harder to do that. Let's say if you're driving in the city, just to pull over for a quick second with the traffic and parking and all the kind of nightmarish stuff you have to deal with driving in the city, it's not as feasible to be able to stretch than like say if you're at an office cubicle. Especially too, I noticed my nutrition wasn't the best. You don't have a microwave with you. You don't have a refrigerator. So any food that you eat has to be kind of like random munchy food. And sometimes, especially for me, when I've been driving for hours and I'm starving, I've only had like a couple protein shakes just to kind of get some fuel in me, and then I see McDonald's or some fast food, I'm like, hey, you know what? All right, I guess I'll just get some, right? And so for me personally, I found that my diet with Uber and Lyft just was not the best, which is why I suggest to a lot of drivers, check out something like Huel. I actually lived off Huel for an entire month. It's essentially powdered food. So you take a scoop of it, put it in a shaker cup, you shake it up, chug it, and you're good to go. It has all the vitamins and minerals you need. I love Huel. So I do want to say that as a quick side note that Huel is an amazing product for drivers. However, it did not exist when I was driving. Number 6, the legal issues. What I'm talking now is things like rideshare insurance or Uber insurance, Lyft insurance. For example, if you're driving and you get into an accident, what do you do then? And this depends, again, state to state. Every state has different rules. For example, like if I'm driving and someone's in the car and I get hit, typically Uber and Lyft might try to help you out. However, if let's say I'm on the clock, so I turn on the app and I'm driving, but I'm driving to pick somebody up, the insurance terms for some states is actually different than if I get into an accident with somebody in the car. So there's all these weird little like gray areas when it comes to just the legal aspects of being a driver. Remember too, though, when it comes to car insurance, that is a whole other ballgame. A lot of insurance companies now, when you sign up for insurance, one of the biggest questions they ask you right in the beginning is, are you gonna be using this vehicle for Lyft, Uber, or any other ride sharing service? And understandably so, your insurance will probably go up, because that makes sense, right? You're driving with Uber. If let's say, however, you sign up through Progressive or Geico or another insurance company and you don't drive, but let's say you do start driving and you don't tell them, you get into an accident, I don't know. They might say, hey, sorry, we didn't know you were driving for Lyft and Uber. We don't want to cover this because we didn't know. You never told us. That is something that might happen. Now, granted, I don't know, but this is where kind of the legal aspects of driving, to me, especially the longer you're on the road, statistically speaking, unfortunately, you're getting to a higher chance of getting into an accident or getting a ticket or something like that. It's just a very tricky area to navigate. Number 7, you don't make any money driving to their house. Now, from an economic perspective, I kind of understand this. Like, I get that obviously Uber and Lyft doesn't want to charge, the person that you're going to pick up the amount that it costs you to drive to them. However, there were times, and this is super frustrating and annoying, where let's say I get a match and it says, okay, they're 10 minutes away. And I'm like, all right, a 10-minute drive to pick somebody up. I'll do it. You start driving, and then 3 minutes away, they cancel it. And yes, you do get a cancellation fee, but there were times the cancellation fee would only be $5. And you're like, great, it's peak hours, it's a Friday night, that ride should have been a lot of money. Now only made $5 driving, roughly 10-ish minutes to this house. Then you get another match. And there were times where I'd get like 2 or 3 cancellations in a row. And at first glance, you might think, oh, well, the cancellation fee at least isn't too bad, right? If, let's say, again, using that example before, I have to drive 10 minutes to pick somebody up. 7 minutes into it, they cancel, so they make $5. Not too bad. But if I have a bunch of cancellations in a row, I'm now making not as much money as I could as if I picked them up and drove them somewhere. Especially during the peak hours, this is the most frustrating because you actually have like a fixed period of time, right? Especially like say morning and evening commutes. I primarily drove 7 to 9 a.m. for the morning commutes. So if I, let's say, got a couple cancellations, that eats away at my time because they only have a 2-hour window where I can really make a lot of money. And now, a bonus reason of why I stopped being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver, and this is actually a very, very big one that a lot of people don't know about, and that is Uber and Lyft can deactivate your account and stop you from being a driver with almost no reason and no warning. And a lot of people don't know this, especially when you're an independent contractor. You don't have that many rights, just being honest. This is one of the unfortunate things about being an independent contractor. There's a lot of pros and a lot of cons, and this is one of those cons. And I've heard of stories of people saying, hey, I'm a full-time driver. I drive to pay my bills. I can put food on the table for my family. And Uber and Lyft, for no reason, I didn't do anything wrong. I woke up one morning and they said, hey, sorry, you can't drive anymore. Your account's been deactivated. Your account's been blocked. And they're like, but I didn't do anything. There was even a time years ago, I think this was around 2016 or 17, that Uber was actually deactivating drivers' accounts who were only driving during the peak hours. And you're like, wait a minute, that's the best time to drive. Why are you deactivating tons of drivers when they're driving in the best periods to drive so they make the most money? You make money too. So I have no idea why Uber decided to do that. The good thing is they're not doing that anymore. However, there are still so many stories to hear about all the time that Uber and Lyft can deactivate you for almost no reason. And granted, it might not be your fault. Let's say you get a bad passenger who's been drinking and then make up some crazy story. Uber and Lyft might take their side. You never know. And that's one thing that kind of keep in mind is that I remember that the longer that I drove and the more that I heard about people getting deactivated, the more I was like, you know what? I would hate to wake up one morning and be relying on that Uber and Lyft income and then get no warning and they say, hey, sorry, your account's been deactivated. You can't drive anymore.